WNYC. This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. And tonight, where web video meets a whole decade of issues. Newsweek magazine has created a speed video replay of this decade that we call the O's. We aired the first part the other week, up to 2003. Here's part 2.
Here's everything you need to know about the first decade of the 21st century. John Kerry wins the Iowa caucus. Howard Dean screams. Janet Jackson and Justin Timberlake teach Americans what a wardrobe malfunction looks like. The CIA admits there was no threat of WMDs in Iraq.
No weapons of mass destruction.
Social networking site Facebook launches on the heels of MySpace and Friendster. Lord of the Rings wins every Academy Award it's nominated for.
Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King.
3/11. Nearly 200 people are killed in Madrid by terrorist bombs. Images surface of American soldiers abusing prisoners at Abu Ghraib. Massachusetts becomes the first state to legalize gay marriage. Ronald Reagan dies at 93. The DNC nominates John Kerry for president.
Reporting for duty.
Barack Obama, who gives the keynote address. The speech is really good. The country forgets about the Iraq War and focuses on Vietnam, swift boats, and windsurfing. Opposition candidate Viktor Yushchenko is poisoned in Ukraine, changing his appearance overnight. Kerry flip-flops.
I actually did vote for the $87 billion. Before I voted against it.
Loses election, no recount necessary. Also on the ballot? Gay marriage, 11 states ban it. Billboard begins ranking best-selling ringtones, a $4 billion industry. A Southeast Asia tsunami kills more than 200,000. Bush begins his second term as president. His speech is about freedom.
Freedom, freedom, freedom.
And tyranny.
Tyranny, tyranny.
Pope John Paul II dies. Pope Benedict is installed.
We have a new pope.
Baseball stars are called before Congress to testify about steroid use.
What other supplements did you use?
I'm not here to talk about the past.
Kerry Shivo becomes a ping-pong and right-to-life battle. The right-to-die side wins. Terrorist bombs kill 52 in London. 2 weeks later, copycat bombers fail. Hurricane Katrina makes landfall. New Orleans fills with water. Bush tells FEMA director Michael Brown he's doing it.
Heck of a job.
He isn't. Over 1,800 people die. John Roberts becomes Chief Justice after William Rehnquist dies. An earthquake in Kashmir kills more than 80,000. U.S. death toll in Iraq hits 2,000. Iran says it has produced enriched uranium. But President Ahmadinejad says he wants peace and stability. The world is skeptical. YouTube explodes, creating a new type of celebrity. Like this guy. This kid. And her, too.
Hi, guys.
President Bush vetoes federal funds for stem cell research. Liquids are banned from airplanes after an apparent terrorist plot. Millions of water bottles end up in the trash. Pluto gets kicked out of the family of planets. Pluto lovers are despondent. Borat opens in theaters.
My name is Borat.
Proving that Americans are gullible. And maybe racist. PlayStation 3 and Nintendo Wii are released within 2 days of each other. The game console war is on. President Gerald Ford dies at 93. Just 4 days before, Saddam Hussein is executed in Iraq. Grainy cell phone video shows his chaotic hanging.
And we will see the finale of that video next week. Good job, Newsweek. And then it's good riddance to the decade of 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, and the collapse of the economy as we knew it. But tonight's program is forward-looking. We will examine the Obama administration's new transparency plan, just released yesterday. We will explore social networking and the law, because you can be busted for twittering the wrong thing. And we'll debate eminent domain, because the courts have said yes to seizing land in Brooklyn for Atlantic Yards, but no in the case of Harlem and Columbia University, despite a kinder, gentler-sounding Columbia.
Today, an urban campus isn't defined by gates and walls, but by weaving the university into the fabric of city life. Columbia University has proposed expanding Upper Manhattan's urban academic community on a 17-acre site in the old Manhattanville manufacturing area.
More of that video later, plus our 5 video picks of the week. But now, transparency. Yesterday, the White House announced its Open Government Directive, President Obama's plan to make transparency, accountability, and participation the new pillars of democracy. Will the directive allow citizens to see through all those granite walls in Washington? Let's ask John Wonderlich, Policy Director at the Sunlight Foundation, which has been pressuring Washington to become more transparent and accountable. He joins us via Skype. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Is this a big deal?
Yes. We're very excited. We think President Obama has announced a very bold plan. It's ambitious, and we're very excited to see it.
Give me an example of how you at the Sunlight Foundation will use it.
So this directive is going to force agencies to start releasing more information. And after the announcement yesterday, we were able to already find a number of different new data sets that they're releasing online that are going to help to change the way the government operates and hopefully even empower commerce throughout the country. One specific thing that was released yesterday is the data about how the government releases information from FOIA requests. They used to do reports.
FOIA is Freedom of Information requests that citizens, usually news organizations, can file to get at government documents and data, correct?
That's right, yes. And so the government is required to release reports once a year about how well the government is responding to these FOIA, to these Freedom of Information requests. And up to now, they've released those results in a document. And some things belong well and are published well in a document form, and some things, when it's data, it becomes a lot less useful when it's published in a PDF or in a document form because it's a spreadsheet. So what they started doing yesterday was releasing all of the information about how the government handles these information requests in a data form, which makes it much more useful so that people can see how they're responding to the requests.
So that's transparent information about the transparency of information,
yeah.
The Freedom of Information Act. Can you give us a concrete example of data about something and how ordinary Americans might use it or learn from it?
Sure. So one that we'd love to see them start releasing better, there's a database called FARA, which stands for the Foreign Agents Registration Act. And that's the law that requires people who lobby on behalf of foreign entities, so maybe the Chinese government or maybe a nonprofit located in South America, any foreign entity that lobbies Congress or the federal government on behalf of this foreign entity, they have to register with the Department of Justice. And very few people know about this, and even the reporters that know about it have to dig through files that are very difficult to read. If that information were online, I think a lot of American people would be interested in seeing what foreign entities are doing with our government.
And so if a citizen journalist or a professional journalist or anyone else wanted to actually look at that data under this new transparency directive from the White House, how would we do it?
Well, we don't know if we're going to be able to anytime soon. We don't know if this will be one of the new data sets that's been chosen. Right now, what we know is that the administration is saying to agencies, not only did we talk about this early on, and not only do we have broad pronouncements about the value of transparency, now the president is saying to all the agencies that answer to him, this is a real commitment, and here are some deadlines for things that you have to do. And one of the first things agencies have to do is identify 3 high-value data sets. So collections of information that will have a lot of value for the public, and put them online. I believe it's within 45 days. And this is a pretty aggressive goal to set for agencies to try to live up to. So for the next month and a half, we're going to be watching closely to see what agencies come up with.
And then when they're online, in what form will they be put online, and who's going to do this?
So there will be people at each agency set up to be responsible for posting the information online. And when they put it online, they're also required to register the data on the new website called data.gov, which is a central place for people, and especially for computer developers, to find where government data is located online, and to have a central place where they can access it.
Later in the program, we're going to do some data visualization. We're going to look at a beautiful data visualization tool showing very visually affordable housing in New York, neighborhood by neighborhood. Do you think that these government agencies in Washington might release very visual data, user-friendly data, appealing data, or are we going to see it as we usually see government data from Washington in absolutely boring gray, document charts?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of the first step that they make is going to be as boring as it gets. It's going to be, well, for most people, at the Sunlight Foundation, this excites us. They're going to release spreadsheets and enormous databases and things like tarballs or JSON or things that just sound crazy. But by releasing that data, it enables people to do exciting things like put together the map you're talking about that says, here are different neighborhoods, and here's how much it costs to live in each one. Or something they did in the UK, My Society put together, an organization called My Society, put together a map where you can say, show me all the areas where it takes less than 30 minutes to commute to this other place, and now show me all the places within that area where I can buy a home for under a certain price. And this is a really useful kind of tool. So those sexier applications are only possible because the boring data is released.
All right. We will be looking for what federal agencies come out with in the next 45 days. Looks like President Obama is trying to keep his promise about a new level of transparency in government. Thank you very much.
Very happy to be here. Thank you.
And coming up, socially networking your way into the arms of the law. It's Brian Lehrer Live.
Ma, guess what? I went back to college. No, I didn't quit my job. I'm finishing my degree with a CUNY Online Bachelor's in Business. I interact online with real City University of New York faculty on a schedule that fits my busy life. Ma, you should look who's teaching at CUNY. And it all leads to a high-quality Bachelor of Science degree in business. I can attend class anywhere, anytime. Yes, Mom, even at your house Friday night for dinner.
The CUNY Online Baccalaureate. Get back to business.
This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Say, are you worried about H1N1? You know, swine flu. Well, CUNY says protect yourself from hidden horrors. Here's how. After touching public surfaces, don't touch your eyes, nose, or mouth. Flu is also spread when infected people cough at you. Sneeze into a tissue, never your bare hands, or use your elbow. Wash often with soap and water, or use an alcohol-based hand cleanser. There are two kinds of flu shots this season. Consult your doctor or healthcare provider on the regular and H1N1 vaccinations. Most importantly, if you feel sick and have fever, stay home. Yes, a little caution goes a long way.
For more information, visit our website, cuny.edu, and click on H1N1 Update.
In September, a social worker from Queens was arrested and accused of using Twitter to disseminate information on the whereabouts of police disseminated to protesters at the G20 summit in Pittsburgh. The charges were later dropped, but only after a 16-hour search of the man's home by the FBI, where computers, books, and other items were seized. Now the nonprofit advocacy group, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, is suing the government, saying the feds must reveal to the public just how they monitor social networking sites like Twitter and Facebook to track crime. Joining us via Skype is Shane Witnoff. He's a student at the Samuelson Law, Technology, and Public Policy Clinic at Berkeley, and he's working with the Electronic Frontier Foundation on the case. Here in the studio is Martin Stoller, the lawyer for Elliot Madison, who sent the alleged criminal tweets in Pittsburgh. Thank you both for joining us.
Glad to be here.
My pleasure.
Tell us about your client and how surprised he was to have gotten in trouble as a result of tweeting something.
Very surprised, I must say. What Elliot was accused of doing, along with a colleague, was posting a note on Twitter for the benefit of demonstrators at the G20, advising the demonstrators that the police had issued an order to disperse from a particular area. That's all he was accused of doing. They fashioned that into a crime called hindering prosecution, an extraordinarily unusual use of a criminal statute, essentially to penalize speech.
But they dropped the charges.
Well, the only reason they dropped the charges is that we made an application to get the affidavits in support of the search warrant that was used to go into his motel room and arrest him. Rather than giving us the affidavits in support of the search warrant, they decided to drop the case.
Shane, is this why you're suing the government?
Well, this is one of the things we're interested in. What we're trying to do is understand exactly when and how the government is using social networking websites to collect information, and also, more importantly, what sort of protocols and protections might be in place to protect citizens, as in this case, from this potential overreach of the government.
So what protections do you want? What would you like the government's broadest possible response to your lawsuit to be?
Well, at this point, we're not actually suing to get them to put any sort of protections in place. This is a Freedom of Information Act request, and the purpose of that is to get the government to reveal exactly, it's to understand how the government works. And so what we're trying to do is start the public debate over when and how the government should be allowed to go onto social networking websites to collect information about its citizens.
Martin, do you think that the government should be staying off social networking sites, or is it legitimate for them to go looking at our tweets and our Facebook posts, etc., if these are things that are public, if they think that it will help them solve a crime or prevent one?
Well, the way I look at it is if people put things out publicly, such as putting themselves in an advertisement or appearing in public, then the government is the same as any other citizen. They can collect information that people put out publicly. What is not put out publicly, however, which is information which remains private and which is intended to remain private by people, that the government has no business going into. The only time they have business going into that is if they have essentially probable cause to believe that a crime has been committed or is about to be committed, and they can satisfy some neutral magistrate. That is to say that they have to come up with some particularly good reason why they want to invade somebody's privacy. Otherwise, they should stay out. They have no business collecting that information any more than you have business collecting my private information.
So, Shane, is the Electronic Frontier Foundation not opposed on just basic grounds to the government looking at social networking sites?
Yeah, that's correct. There are certainly times when social networking sites have provided really valuable information in preventing crimes, helping people in bad situations. And so there are absolutely times when the government should be on social networking websites. It's a really valuable source of information. But however, we're interested in the times they're on social networking sites should be targeted, or at the very least, that's a conversation we as a society need to have. There's a general balance between privacy and security, and we have an agreement with our government. They're allowed to come into my house under rare situations when they've satisfied that neutral magistrate. And what hasn't happened is more and more people share their information online. We haven't had the public discussion as to when it's okay for the government to come into my private profile to see what I have there.
And it's funny because in your client's case, the government was objecting to spreading information about what the police might be doing during a demonstration. This is exactly what the U.S. government is praising people in Iran for when they use Twitter to get the word out protesting this week.
It is a bit of a contradiction, isn't it, that for somebody like Elliot Madison to be criminalized for posting information on Twitter that, according to the government anyway, provides assistance to people who are involved in demonstrations against governmental policies. And at the same time, we have the State Department praising the people in Iran who were using Twitter to keep themselves abreast of what was going on in protests after the elections in Iran. There's a bit of a contradiction there. I'm, in a sense, upset that they dropped the case against Elliot because I would have loved to litigate the whole notion of somebody being criminalized for posting a note on Twitter.
And you can't litigate that outside of having a client facing criminal charges?
Well, I guess that would not be possible for me to do. But what I'm curious about, what the Electronic Frontier Foundation is doing with their Freedom of Information Act request, Shane, let me ask you, how do you get over the law enforcement exception to the stuff that you're asking about?
So it's a good question. So under the Freedom of Information Act, there's a number of statutory limitations that allow the government to say, no, that's information we don't have to hand over. And so what we're hoping is that some of what we're asking for won't fall under those exceptions. And part of filing suit is that we get to have that negotiation. So we've sent out letters asking for information. Under the law, the government has 20 days in which to respond. All of the agencies which we're suing did not respond within that statutory deadline. And so now we'll get a judge involved to help us negotiate, them turning over the documents and figuring out what falls under the exception and what doesn't.
So how far does the government go with this, in your experience, Shane? Are they posting fake profiles on Facebook or Twitter, for example, in order to gain access to people they're interested in?
There's certainly been more and more news articles that have been documenting this. There's been a number of cases of state and federal law enforcement going online and using social networking websites to collect this information. There was a recent case in Wisconsin of a police officer who appeared to create a profile of an attractive young woman, and then she sent friend requests to a number of young men who happened to be underage. And by using this account, the police officer was able to get pictures of them drinking. They were all underage. He brought them into the office and fined them for underage drinking.
So last question, Martin Stoller.
Certainly.
Should people be on the alert as regular users of Facebook or Twitter for things like that, or is that just too vigilant?
No, it's not too vigilant. I mean, the amount of electronic information that is out there is phenomenal. And
the New York Times had a stat today that the average American uses 34 gigs of of digital content every day.
I mean, what people have to be aware of is that all that electronic information, all those X's and O's or the ones and the zeros, are accessible. For national security letters by the feds, they can come in and, without going to a judge, and say to for example, a server to say, we want all the emails that you've been giving us. We need it for national security purposes. So people should be extraordinarily careful about what they put up. I always tell my clients that don't say anything on the telephone that you don't want to hear 6 months down the road when you're facing criminal charges.
In fact, before the show, I was just looking up your college transcripts. No, I'm kidding. Thank you both very much. This is an important issue for the digital age. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Brian.
This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video beats the issues. Here are this week's online video picks. Number 1, last Wednesday, the New York State Senate defeated a same-sex marriage bill. And just after it happened, we spoke on the phone with Democratic Senator Diane Savino of Staten Island in Brooklyn. Well, it turns out that her impassioned plea in favor of the bill on the Senate floor has broken out as something of a hit on YouTube. Here is an excerpt.
We in government don't determine the quality or the validity of people's relationships. If we did, we would not issue 3/4 of the marriage licenses we do. And I know there are many people in the religious community who feel that we're going to force this on them, when that in fact is not true. We have never done that. I'm a Roman Catholic. The Catholic Church has the right to deny me the sacrament of marriage if they determine the person I choose to marry is unfit or our relationship doesn't meet their standards. City Hall does not have that right. That will not change under this bill. That will never change. Religious institutions can continue to practice discrimination with respect to the sacrament of marriage. We don't, we shouldn't. We should not do it for gay and lesbian couples. I know many people are concerned about the destruction of the sanctity of marriage as well, and they view this as a threat. But let me ask you something, ladies and gentlemen. What are we really protecting? When you look at the divorce rate in our society, turn on the television. We have a wedding channel on cable TV devoted to the behavior of people on their way to the altar. They spend billions of dollars, behave in the most appalling way, all in an effort to be princess for a day. You don't have cable television? Put on network TV. We're giving away husbands on a game show. You can watch The Bachelor, where 30 desperate women will compete to marry a 40-year-old man who's never been able to maintain a decent relationship in his life.
The full-throated and openly heterosexual Senator Savino, which brings us to video pick number 2. Republican Senator James Alisi of Rochester voting no. He had previously been considered likely to vote yes and appears to hang his head in shame while muttering his vote.
Senator Alisi. No. Senator Auburn.
So which one was proud of their vote and which one was ashamed? We screen videos, you decide. Video pick number 3. When President Obama spoke about the economy to students in Schnecksville, Pennsylvania last week, this was probably not one of the questions he expected to get.
I was wondering if maybe if you checked out some of the statistics about legalizing prostitution, gambling, drugs, and nonviolent crime in order to stimulate some of the economy?
You know, I have to say this. Well, I appreciate the boldness of your question. That will not be my job strategy. But let me say this. What year are you in school?
This is my second year in college.
Your second year. I mean, first of all, part of what you're supposed to do in college is question conventional wisdom. And so you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, which is thinking in new ways about things. Here's...
Well, you open the floor, you take your chances, even if you're the President of the United States. Video pick number 4 is a different solution to health and economics. Carly Fiorina, do you know her? She's the former CEO of Hewlett-Packard and a breast cancer survivor. She gave the Republicans' weekly media address last week. She wants us to fear Obama health reform because of the new guidelines that fewer women should get mammograms.
In the face of a national outcry over the recent task force recommendations, the Secretary of Health and Human Services said the Preventive Services Task Force doesn't set federal policy. The real question, though, is whether bodies like this would set policy under the $2.5 trillion, 2,074-page plan that's now making its way through Congress. Unfortunately, the answer to that question isn't encouraging either. The health care bill now being debated in the Senate explicitly empowers this very task force to influence future coverage and preventive care. Section 4105, for example, authorizes the Secretary of Health and Human Services to deny payment for prevention services the task force recommends against. Another section requires every health plan in America to cover task force recommended preventive services. In fact, there are more than a dozen examples in the bill where this task force is empowered to influence care. There is a reason American women with breast cancer have a higher survival rate than women in countries with government-run health care. Unlike those countries, our government doesn't dictate what prevention and treatments women can get. While some defend the idea of a government task force, my experience with cancer tells me it's wrong. Cutting down on mammograms might save the government some money that it will then spend on something else. But it won't save lives.
You'll note, by the way, that Fiorina compared government decision-making to our decision-making with our doctors, not to the barriers that our private insurers often put up. Is your private insurance as flexible as the legendary CEO's insurance? And video pick number 5, this just in from the Onion News Network. Oh no, teleprompter failure at the White House.
Jane, tell us what exactly happened over there.
Well, on a last night in the middle of a conversation with Malia about raising her allowance, President Obama's home teleprompter suddenly went blank. He sort of froze mid-sentence, but after a few seconds of silence, Obama was able to call up his prepared remarks from memory.
So it didn't differ at all, basically, from the copy of the dinner conversation that had been sent over to reporters beforehand?
Right, that's right. It was almost verbatim.
Wow.
He hit all the points about Malia needing to get at least a B in math and trying to get onto the soccer team, just in a different order than they were written.
Well, White House Deputy Press Secretary Brenda England briefly addressed this error today. Let's take a look.
Look, the president has hundreds of conversations every day, and it simply isn't feasible for him to memorize the text for every single one. The prompter is really just a tool to help the president remember to speak, blink, and breathe.
And look, Obama is always open about the fact that he works with a team of talented writers on every remark he makes.
Yeah, absolutely. The prompters just help make sure he doesn't say the wrong thing at any point ever.
Exactly. He would write his conversations himself, but he's just too busy.
He's the president.
He does make sure, though, to look over and edit any asides or offhand remarks he didn't personally script, though.
Of course. You know, Jane, it seems like the president has gotten better at using the teleprompter since the campaign.
Yes,
we all remember that horrible pumpkin patch incident before the election when the wind blew the prompter over in the middle of picking pumpkins with the girls.
That's right, and causing Obama to fumble around awkwardly, drop the pumpkin he was holding, and refer to Sasha as Jennifer.
That from the Onion News Network, and those are this week's online video picks. This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. We all have seen bar graphs and pie charts that convey numerical information graphically. Well, the world of computing and web video allows a new and far better way of showing what statistics really mean now. It's called data visualization, where information jumps right out at you. In the coming weeks, we'll be exploring all kinds of important data in this accessible way. Today, we will look at a data visualization that shows what it costs to live in various neighborhoods in our region. To show us this data and to help interpret it, I am joined now by John Mangan from the Center for Urban Pedagogy, a New York-based nonprofit that is creating tools like this to give citizens a stronger voice in community development, and Elizabeth Source, the Director of Training at the Urban Homesteading Assistance Board, which is dedicated to helping community renters become property owners. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
This is very exciting. John, let's go right to your map and jump into a first example.
Okay, great.
Tell us what we're going to see.
I work at a place called CUP, and we wanted to make a straightforward tool for housing advocates, policy folks, developers, community board members, anybody really, to look in a simple way at income demographics, at housing costs, and about the concept of affordability, which actually has a technical definition that comes from the government. So we took data available through InfoShare, the InfoShare website, which I believe is a CUNY a CUNY
function,
website.
I don't know.
And we worked with a group called Stamen Design, a gentleman named Sha Huang, a web developer in San Francisco, to map out this data in every subborough area in New York City. So here we're looking at the lower income demographics on the Lower East Side. Now, you'll see a cluster of people down in the lower end of the income brackets, in the extremely low income category, very low income category, etc.
So that, for people looking at their televisions, if this is small, all the way on the left, the yellow bar and the red bar, correct?
That's right. So the line at the bottom of the site has income categories, right there. Those represent annual incomes, and the different colors represent different income categories that come from the government. Where do those categories come from? They come from a concept called MFI, median family income, which in New York City is $76,800. And those are important because they're used to determine eligibility for various affordable housing programs.
So as I'm looking at this on the Lower East Side, it looks like a fairly mixed income community. More very low income people than any other single group, the yellow bar, but very low income, moderate income, middle income, all roughly in the same range.
Exactly. This surprises a lot of people, though, to see so many people down at the lower end of the bracket. But the Lower East Side has a concentrations of public housing. It has a lot of relatively new immigrants. We also know, however, that it's one of the hottest rental markets in the city. So we also have a component in our chart here where you can click on who can afford to live here. And
we see, by the way, all the way on the right, the pink bar for high income. There is a little scooch of high income population on the Lower East Side.
It's no Upper East Side, which is the wealthiest neighborhood in the city and is predominantly high income. But yes, increasing numbers of people are moving into the high income category in the Lower East Side.
And so you're showing us here that the median income on the Lower East Side $35,000.
Yeah, exactly, which is, less than half, I think, of what the citywide median income is.
So Beth, let me bring you in here. How would you use this information at the Urban Homesteading Assistance Board?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do at UHAB is we work with affordable co-ops throughout the city. And one of the most challenging things that they have to do is set resale policies. So if we could jump up to the South Bronx for a second, which is one of the highest concentrations of co-ops in the city, and look at Highbridge, you see that this is kind of a very different profile from the Lower East Side. We have a lot of people who are in the extremely low, very low, low income category, which is exactly the target income that the affordable co-ops, the HDFCs in the city, seek to serve. And we think about affordability in two different ways, that the maintenance fee plus whatever somebody would have to pay towards a monthly mortgage together have to be less than 30% of their income. So in our co-ops, a lot of the maintenance fees are coming out to be about, for a 2-bedroom, about, oh, I have to move the one down, $800 per month. So what we do is we can work with co-op leaders to say, well, this is who your maintenance fee is affordable to right now.
Can I just interrupt one minute? Because the top of the tick mark is annual income, but below the tick marks, that translates annual income into affordable monthly rent. That is 30% of a family's income. Sorry.
Right. So then when co-ops are talking about what the sales price would be, we could say, well, you know, if you're selling for $30,000, that would add about $75 per month to that family's housing costs. So they might be up this much. So now you can see who it would be affordable to. For neighborhoods like John says that are hot, like Harlem, if we go down to Harlem here, you know, if we started the same maintenance fees, if we put that 2-bedroom at $800 a month, a lot of co-ops might say, well, I could sell for $100,000. Well, $100,000 would add about $500 per month to a family's housing costs. So that would put them up at $1,300. And, you know, this really helps to show co-ops how sales prices influence the affordability of their product and who in the community they're serving.
Yeah, so basically, government officials, developers, and others will use the term affordable housing. And it seems like it has a plain meaning, but it has a technical definition. So, you know, Atlantic Yards or Toll Brothers Development in Gowanus or something like that, they'll say, hey, we're going to provide 20% affordable units. We want this tool to help people to look behind the term to ask the question, you know, affordable to whom?
Affordable to whom? Because there are different legal definitions of affordable housing and different policy definitions, right? Affordable to people making $50,000 a year for a family of 4, or $75,000 or $20,000. So that's
exactly. And so there aren't many programs anymore that serve families in the extremely low-income category and very low-income category. Those were public housing in Section 8. Developers like Toll Brothers or Atlantic Yards will say, hey, we have affordable units. Well, affordable to whom? You know, in Atlantic Yards, that can mean units that are affordable for families all the way up to, you know, $130,000 of income. So that would be a $3,300 apartment up there. And, you know, that doesn't meet everybody's definition of affordable, and it might not fit with which families live in the neighborhood.
Right.
So we want people to be able to look at proposed developments and see, do they fit into the neighborhood? Do you want these people to move here, or, you know, how do you want your neighborhood to look?
So, Beth, it's primarily for government policymakers to look at and then hopefully feel twangs of guilt, if nothing else, if they're only developing, if they're only approving luxury developments, because developers are going to look at this and say, we just want to go where the maximum income is.
Sure. I mean, and you had as a developer, we have a development arm as well. And one of the things that we challenge ourselves to do and the co-op community is to look and use this tool instead of saying, well, what could a 2-bedroom apartment sell for in Harlem? Instead, look who's living in Harlem and what can they afford. So you back into the sales prices. The glorious thing I think about this tool is that it's easy enough and sophisticated enough to use both with lenders, with developers, but we've also been using it out in the community with co-op leaders, you know, sitting around kitchen tables, which I think speaks really well to the university, how universal the tool is.
Our next segment touches on Atlantic Yards. What do you want to tell them?
No comment.
What do you want to tell them?
Take a look at this tool and see who's living there now, I think.
You want to do that? Can we go down that way?
Do you want to take
Prospect
it?
Heights,
Sure.
Brooklyn?
Sure.
Just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
I wanted to get to Brooklyn anyway in this segment.
Yeah, I guess we haven't quite made it down there yet.
Right. We were
So, Prospect Heights right there.
look maybe at another neighborhood, but since Atlantic Yards is
So
hotly contested,
that
who's
is
there?
that is a fairly equal income distribution for Brooklyn. Again, a lot of neighborhoods there will have huge clusters of people at the lower end who can afford to live there. I know that the residential developments at Atlantic Yards are 50% affordable. And that's a mix of incomes from the middle, moderate, and I think there are a few lower income units there as well. So you could live in the new development probably for about $1,500 maybe for a 2-bedroom. Because,
month.
you know, per month. Developers to get subsidies will be right at the requirements. You know, if they have to make low income, 20% low income units, it's going to be right at the border between low and moderate income. So that's probably the lowest. There'd be 10 or 15% of the apartments for them. But then I do know that there are also apartments for people families earning up to $130,000. And for that, you know, the city, the state, and the federal government will be subsidizing that development.
When you use this tool, do you get an impression of how segregated we are as a city by housing? Because honestly, a lot of the neighborhoods that we've looked at so far are fairly mixed. And I think that's the progressive ideal, right? You don't want to segregate people based on income. You want mixed income neighborhoods. It looks like we have some of those in the city, even if we're segregated block by block.
Yeah, definitely, I think. And I think especially looking at neighborhoods like the Lower East Side that we started with here, one of the things that I was really surprised by looking at this map was how diverse it was. You know, when I think of Lower East Side, I think of a really hot neighborhood with those $3,000 rents, with those $1 million sale prices, which is very different from the demographics that you see in this tool.
So, John, this tool shows us the difference between reading the numbers and seeing the numbers.
Yes. This tool actually comes out of a broader project that started with an enormous felt chart that we use in a workshop setting. Felt sticks to felt, and so we have participants populate the chart. These squares you see on the screen are actually representations of felt squares that the workshop participants would fill in so that they could learn about income demographics, about affordability, about rents in their neighborhood as they built out the chart and sort of teach themselves and others in an interactive way.
How can people see your work?
Well, this is envisioningdevelopment.net/map, but envisioningdevelopment.net explains the entire Envisioning Development program, which is a series of teaching tools about land use concepts like affordable housing, like zoning law, like ULURP. So envisioningdevelopment.net. We have a whole bunch of stuff there for you to check out.
You want to pile on and add one?
Oh, sure. So you can learn about UHAB, the Urban Homesteading Assistance Board, at either uhab.org or uhab.coop.
Very visual, very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Coming up, eminent domain, seizing private property for public purposes. Why does Atlantic Yards qualify, but not Columbia University's expansion into West Harlem, at least according to the courts? Back in a minute. This is Brian Lehrer Live.
Did you know CUNY leads the way for students with disabilities?
CUNY leads to my career as a healthcare professional.
CUNY leads to my career as an accountant.
CUNY leads to my career as a music teacher.
CUNY leads means linking employment, academics, and disability services. If you're a CUNY student with a visible or invisible disability, the City University of New York offers eligible students free career development and placement services.
Gain access to exciting employment opportunities through the power of a CUNY education.
As an employer, CUNY Leads provides me with a more qualified, diverse workforce.
Each campus has its own Leads counselor, a go-to person who knows you
and helps you enjoy every aspect of college life.
For more information and to find out if you qualify, visit cuny.edu/CUNY Leads. CUNY Leads to the career I always wanted.
Did you know that there are 8 national parks in New York City? There are also 8 parking spaces in New York City. But that's something else. New York City has Federal Hall, where George Washington became our first president, the Statue of Liberty, and Gateway with beautiful beaches and protected wildlife. New York City has a range of national parks you won't find anywhere else, because you cannot move a national park. It's a park. Even if you wanted to get it out of here, you couldn't. America's spirit lives in our national parks.
This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Eminent domain. Know the legal concept? It allows the government to buy your land without your permission in order to benefit the public. And it's not just for highways and airports anymore. Here in New York, rulings recently came down in 2 lawsuits challenging the use of eminent domain to seize private property to make room for big private developments. In the seemingly contradictory rulings, one court told Columbia University it could not take property in the footprint of its proposed expansion to the western edge of Harlem, while the state's highest court said eminent domain could indeed be used to make room for the Atlantic Yards project in Prospect Heights, Brooklyn. We'll examine these rulings, but first let's connect the issue to the streets. Here's part of Columbia University's own video explaining their concept of community-friendly expansion.
Today, an urban campus isn't defined by gates and walls, but by weaving the university into the fabric of city life. Columbia University has proposed expanding Upper Manhattan's urban academic community on a 17-acre site in the old Manhattanville manufacturing area at the western edge of West Harlem, near the Hudson River. The plan is for gradual growth over the next quarter century that will not only provide Columbia with the space needed to maintain one of the world's major research universities in Upper Manhattan, but also create a center for civic and commercial life that reconnects the residential sections of Harlem with a revitalized Hudson River waterfront.
Community opponents ask whether Columbia's expansion is less about the banks of the Hudson and more about money in their bank. Here is a glimpse of an opposition video produced by Base 4 Media. The narrator is Reverend Earl Coopercamp of St. Mary's Episcopal Church in that neighborhood.
I do worry, though, that Columbia is kind of packaging this as kind of furthering their educational mission. Well, yes, it is, but they're also making money out of it. So therefore, it's really a revenue-generating activity. So let's just call it for what it is and what it will be. And at that point, you got to do business like anybody else. You can't get an unfair advantage of using the state and the state's powers of eminent domain on this. If you're running a business, you got to run a business like anybody else does.
It seems an appellate court agreed with Reverend Coopercamp. So why the rejection of eminent domain in the Columbia University case, but the okay for Atlantic Yards developer Bruce Ratner's plan for high-rises and a basketball stadium in Brooklyn? With me in the studio is Rick Hills, a law professor at NYU who studies land use regulation, and joining us via Skype from Albany is land use expert Patricia Salkin, director of the Government Law Center at Albany Law School. Welcome, both of you, to the program.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Rick Hills, let's unpack these cases. What's the essential difference between Columbia and Atlantic Yards?
The essential difference is that the Atlantic Yards case involved the state constitution, and the Columbia case involved the federal constitution. So on technical legal grounds, a lower judge could effectively defy the highest court in New York. The facts are very hard to distinguish, although one can make an effort. But the laws that were being applied in the case are technically different. The state constitution has a public use clause. The federal constitution has a public use clause. They're virtually identical in their text, but a precedent on the federal constitution from the Court of Appeals does not bind the appellate division in the Columbia case.
Okay, so you'll do the Atlantic Yards case in just a minute. Patricia in Albany, why don't you do the Columbia case and explain exactly what the court decreed?
Well, the mid-level court in New York, the appellate court, said that the Columbia University expansion was not a valid public purpose to justify the use of eminent domain. And in large part, the court relied upon the fact that there was no credible evidence of proof of blight. And the court also said that the standard of underutilization of property alone could not be the basis for the use of eminent domain. The court also said that the Urban Development Corporation Act's blight standard was unconstitutional as applied in this case because the agency did not have a written definition of how we were going to interpret the phrase blight. And lastly, the mid-level court said that there was no civic purpose for the expansion of what they called an elite private university.
And Rick, the word blight is key to the Atlantic Yards ruling too, isn't it?
Yeah, the state constitution allows condemnation, and the state statutes allow condemnation for substandard lots. Unsanitary or substandard lots is the phrase that occurs in the statute. And the Court of Appeals held that it was a debatable issue whether the area around the Atlantic Yards, which is basically a rail yard next to Flatbush Avenue, was substandard. Substandard compared to what? The court said, many people might think this is a decent mixed neighborhood of the sort that was just on the previous installment of this show. Middle-income people, low-income people, the buildings are sound. Other people might say, it's got a lot of vacant lots, there are some weeds. The vacancy is, of course, the result of the rail yard. And the court said what courts have always said, both in New York State and the federal court, until very recently, which is it's not a judge's job to decide what constitutes substandard unless the finding is so preposterous and absurd that the judge has to find bad faith.
But that's exactly what we've come to, with eminent domain being used now to seize private property for private purposes, is these challenges in court where judges find themselves in the position of having to define blight and then tell the plaintiffs and the defense whether a particular parcel of land meets the definition of blight in his or her opinion, right?
Yeah, and judges have always been reluctant to do that. Only in a few cases have you found judges that will put the brakes on eminent domain. Michigan Supreme Court, the Washington Supreme Court, Ohio Supreme Court, the vast majority of state Supreme Courts and all of the federal courts will say this is not really a judicial call, it's a policy-making call.
Patricia, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think that clearly I agree with Rick in terms of where the New York Court of Appeals stands on this issue. The appellate court did not acknowledge, at least the majority opinion, did not acknowledge the recent Atlantic Yards opinion in their decision, although the dissent did. But the majority in the Columbia case relied on Justice Kennedy's concurrence in the Kelo case that said, look, if there is pretext, if we think that something is afoul here, then we're not going to give legislative deference. Then we're going to look into it. And that's exactly what the appellate court took the opportunity to do.
That Kelo case, the recent U.S. Supreme Court case, basically gave the green light to municipalities to seize land for the broadest possible definition of the public good. That is, they could seize people's land, buy it, but take it by force, to sell it to private developers, putting up things like shopping malls and housing projects and basketball stadiums, not railroad rights of way and things like that, the old public purpose definition of eminent domain. They could take private property and give it to private developers. But is there a policy backlash against that now in the United States? Because so many people were kind of grossed out by that decision. Are places more reluctant to do it than they were before?
Well, about 40 states enacted statutes and constitutional reform immediately after the Kelo decision in order to put limitations on how far government could go in the use of eminent domain for purposes of economic development. New York was not one of those states. And again, I don't think that the Court of Appeals feels that economic development itself is a problem, but I do think that the Court of Appeals has suggested that the legislature do a better job of defining blight.
So the Atlantic Yards developers were lucky that New York as a state didn't go as far as 40 other states.
Yeah, though to be fair, 22 of those state statutes had virtually no effect whatsoever. They were purely for public relations. Typically what they did is simply reiterate the terms in judicial opinions and say, we really mean it. But since the courts never took those terms seriously in the first place, they're not likely to take them seriously now simply because the legislature repeated it in a louder voice.
Patricia, do I understand correctly that the same person argued the blight case both for the Columbia University situation and the Atlantic Yards situation, went before these two courts and argued in each case that these fit the definition of blight under the law?
Well, no, it wasn't the attorney. It was one of the consultants that was hired by the Empire State Development Corporation, did work both on the Columbia project and on the Atlantic Yards project. And in order to come up with a definition of blight for Atlantic Yards, this consulting firm said, well, if at least 50% of the building is vacant, then that's going to equal blight. But for Columbia, they said if 25% or more of the building is vacant, then it's going to be substandard. And so there clearly was a difference in how the same firm was coming up with a standard for what might be considered blight.
So we have kind of a blight czar in New York, this consultant.
Well, there were a number of other consultants that were involved that reviewed the work, but clearly it's up to the government and to define what flight is.
So quickly, Rick, is this Columbia case, which came very quickly after the Atlantic Yards case, good news for the plaintiffs in Atlantic Yard, for the residents who still want to stop the Atlantic Yards project? Might the higher court now in New York State look at the Columbia ruling and say, well, let me give this another look in Brooklyn?
I doubt it. It's conceivable that the Court of Appeals will change its mind based upon what its lower court said to it. But based upon what the Court of Appeals said in the Atlantic Yards case, if they stick with what they've always stuck with, and remember, this is a state that has allowed condemnations for the New York Times building, for the Times Square redevelopment project, for all of Robert Moses's projects. This has been going on for a long time. It's very unlikely that this is going to be anything more than a speed bump on the way to Manhattanville's condemnation.
All right. Well, thank you both very much for joining us, clarifying eminent domain for our viewers.
It's our pleasure.
Finally tonight, a glimpse of a video called 16 Moments. It's a celebration of life that was inspired by David Eagleman's book, Some, and produced by WNYC's Radio Lab. That's our moment for today. That's it for this week's show. We're here live Wednesday nights at 7:30 or anytime online at brianlehrer.tv. Next week, a high-speed web video tour of the final 3 years of this decade. And tune into my daily radio show, 10 a.m. on WNYC Radio. Tomorrow morning, Governor Patterson explains his emergency budget decrees and Congressman Anthony Weiner on the new plan to expand Medicare. That's 10 a.m. on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. Have a great night.